Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change Issues and asks, does he stand by his statements at the 6th Australia-New Zealand Climate Change and Business Conference last week?
Mr. Speaker, the conference chair, Gary Taylor, described my speech as one of the highlights of the conference and commended the New Zealand government on successfully implementing an ETS on the 1st of July. So I'm very pleased to stand by those statements.
I love your modesty.
Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Probably not the most riveting conference as the world is.
The member should just ask his question.
Thank you, sir. Apart from the emissions trading scheme, does the Minister have any plan to reduce New Zealand's greenhouse emissions, apart from the biofuels grant scheme, which Jerry Brownlee admitted on 22 July was a failure, the electric vehicle user charge exemption, which only a few vehicles qualify for, and schemes originated under the last government, like Warm Up New Zealand, subsidies for solar heating, and energy conservation campaigns?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be very proud to highlight just a few of the complementary measures that the government has through the ETS. Let me take the member through a few. 1. 50,000 New Zealand homes insulated under the scheme that's been led by Jerry Brownlee. Over 5,000 homes that have received grants for solar water panels, more than was achieved in 9 years of the last government. The Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Emissions, led by my colleague Tim Grosser and David Carter. The biofuel grant scheme, the scheme for electric cars, the grants for marine electric production. Mr. Speaker, I could go on and on, but I don't want to humiliate the member.
Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I've called Charles Chauvel.
Mr. Speaker, why did the Minister say last week that a national policy statement to incentivise renewable electricity generation is needed by the end of the year, when his government repealed the renewables preference legislation late in 2008, just showing that New Zealand has lost 2 years' worth of valuable progress in this area?
Mr. Speaker, I would draw that member's attention to the record around renewable energy, because in every year that Labor was in government, the proportion of renewable energy dropped. In fact, we more than trebled the amount of electricity that was produced from coal during the term of the last government. The measures that were adopted with respect to...
Order. A point of order has been called, and I can imagine what it is. The Honourable Darren Hughes.
All very interesting, sir, but this question is about today, about this government, about the future, not going back decades ago and the past or whatever it is going on about.
Now, I say to the Honourable Tony Ryle, who is normally a well-behaved member in this House, he does not interject like that when a point of order is being raised, and the point of order was the most reasonable point of order. What the Honourable Nick Smith had to say was very interesting, but the question actually asked very particularly about some matters. I invite Charles Chauvel to repeat his question. The Minister obviously didn't hear it first time around. Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question to the Minister is, why does he say that a national policy statement to incentivise renewable electricity generation is needed by the end of the year, when his government repealed the previous government's renewable preference legislation late in 2008, showing that New Zealand has lost 2 years' worth of valuable progress in this area?
Mr. Speaker, the advice the government received on coming to office was that the renewable preference clause was a Clayton's measure that would not work. And that is why the government repealed it, and that was the view right through the industry, that actually has to make the investments in renewable energy. Now, we campaigned on having a national policy statement on renewable energy because, quite frankly, under the RMA as it stands, it is easier to get a resource consent for a thermal generating station than a renewable one. We're going to change that, and that's why the government will advance that policy this year.
Very good.
Nikki Wagner.
To the Minister of Climate Change Issues. Has the Minister seen reports of the conference from Australian business journalist Ian Hamilton that New Zealand is showing bigger developed nations how it's done when it comes to tackling greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. And from the Business Spectator, that was equally complimentary. And if so, what other feedback did he receive?
Honourable Dr. Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I have seen those reports and many others that were universally positive of New Zealand's position on climate change. The only criticism I heard at the conference in Sydney on climate change came from Chauvel, which was a bit off, given the long-standing convention that we keep our domestic politics at home.
Charles Chauvel.
Question.
Order. Members will please be courteous to the House. Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister have any plan to reduce agricultural emissions, or will the terms of reference for the review of the ETS that he is shortly to announce foreshadow an exemption for agriculture from the scheme?
Mr. Speaker, the most important challenge around New Zealand's agricultural emissions is to find the technologies by which we can efficiently produce food for the world while not contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. And that is why this government has invested tens of millions of dollars and secured the support of a huge number of developed and developing countries to invest in the Global Research Alliance on agricultural emissions. I appreciate the support of the Green Party for that initiative. I've been disappointed that Labor has been opposed.
Question number 11, Nikki Kay.